we're taught in school to write a plus sign for Untitled CO2 for nasal cannula. I mean, hundreds of us, thousands of us do it. And basically the consent order that I signed for the state of Georgia basically says, you shouldn't do that. We don't want you to do that. It's not right. So now after I talk about this, the kind of the takeaway, besides the CRNA expert witnesses, I do a plus sign and then I do a slash and then I write whatever the number it says on the monitor. And then I write a little thing at the bottom, because I still paper charts, that says entitled CO2 via nasal cannula not accurate.
Welcome to the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show. My conversation with Dana and Jennifer predictably went longer than our typical show time, so I've decided to cut this one up into two parts. This first part goes into some detail about Jennifer and Dana's backgrounds and beginnings. Part two will just go live next week. Welcome to another Provider Spotlight episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. I've got another 2-for-1 for you today, as I'm joined today by two women who each have unique strengths and experiences that have led them to combine their talents and provide CRNAs with a special CE course. Jennifer Sewell is the founder of Painless CE, and Dana Standridge is a CRNA expert witness. Both of them are wives, moms, and CRNAs who have alternative streams of income, so they do anesthesia when they feel like it. Welcome to the show, Jennifer and Dana.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Well, normally I like to start off with, different questions, but I realize that part of this is there's just more story to it. So what I'm going to do is just let you guys tell the story of how you met and discovered each other's individual talents.
So I started Painless CE about 3 years ago. I was at a business mastermind meeting with my husband and a bunch of other business owners. And my husband, and there was one other physician that was in the mastermind, and I asked her why she was there, what she was working on, because my husband's goal was to scale clinics. And her answer kind of caught me off guard. She said, I'm here to get coverage for a documentary I'm working on, and it's about physician suicide. And I was like, excuse me? And I was like, are you talking about physicians that take care of people that commit suicide? And she said, no, physician suicide. And I was like, I didn't even know it was a problem. And she's like, oh yeah, it's a huge problem. And she's like, it's an epidemic in our country, and anesthesiologists are at the top of the chart for physician suicides. And I was like, really? And so I asked her, I was like, well, why do physicians commit suicide? And she said, well, a lot of times it's about, maybe they lost a patient, or just patient outcome didn't go the way they wanted. Could even be a legal case, or sometimes just divorce, or just the pressure of everything together, and they just can't handle it anymore. And so I feel like a grip in my heart whenever I was standing there talking to her. And the more I thought about it when I went home, I was like, wow, I was like, all the reasons she named, like CRNAs face all these things too. We lose patients, we face litigation, we have trouble with relationships just because our jobs are so hectic and there's so much stress. And I was like, we have the same job as anesthesiologists that's at the highest at the chart, but who's doing anything for us? And I was like, well, maybe I should be that person. And so the more I got to know Dr. Weibel, she told me how she was doing retreats for physicians and then teaching them how to set up their own medical practices so they could practice the way they wanted to and not under the restrictions of the hospital. And I thought, well, that's great. I can at least start doing retreats. So I started doing retreats, which was great because a lot of it, like I said, these were all for women. Women would come and have these personal breakthroughs and go home a different person, which was great. But I really felt like they needed something after, which was maybe sometimes just a career change or a plan B, because even though you can have this awesome retreat, you have this great weekend, you meet new friends, Doesn't matter how good you feel then or when you go back home, if you're going back into a job environment where you're being abused or you just hate it and it makes it hate your life, like, then you just had a good weekend. There's really no change. So I wanted to do something that could like show CRNAs other opportunities that were out there. I partnered with one other girl who we do aesthetics together through our CEs. Dana actually signed up for one of those retreats, was going to be up at the beach, and we were also going to learn about Botox. And I just happened to, I don't remember if we were on the phone together or maybe she just reached out via Messenger, is like, hey, I want to come to your retreat. And she's like, I have this story that I think would be beneficial for people to hear. And she told me about it. And immediately I got chills because it went into the whole reason that I started this company. And I had her tell it. We had to go virtual. That was during COVID, and everybody it was a virtual event, was just blown away by her story. When the evaluations came back, they said that was the most helpful thing of the whole 4-day event, was hearing Dana talk. And so I invited her to speak at Nashville. Again, the evaluations, it was just overwhelming. Like Dana Standridge just talked. What she said is going to change the way I practice. It's going to change. I'm going to help get policies changed at my work. So it was Dana Standridge, Dana Standridge, Dana Standridge. So even after the event there at Nashville, a couple of girls reached out to her, and she, out of the goodness of her heart, spent time on the phone with them, taught them how to become an expert witness. Already got cases, and I think already been paid just from her teaching them. And I was like, well, this would be a great opportunity for more CRNAs, but obviously you can't work in anesthesia 2 days a week, do your expert witness cases and do Botox and teach people how to do this on your spare time. So I was like, why don't we make a course together? And so that's how the CRNA expert witness course came about. And I know when you hear Dana's story, you're going to be just like the way I was and the way all the attendees were when they heard it, because it is a phenomenal story. But the great thing about Dana is like you can talk on the phone to her and you're always going to feel better. And that's kind of what she's done with her story, is like she's taken something that was horrible. It was a horrible experience, but she's found the good in it and she's made it into something wonderful.
Well, and Dana, that is a perfect segue, because I do want to talk about your experience in the courtroom. And, I remember when I was actually in anesthesia school we went into basically the Wake Forest Law School's courtroom that they used to practice. And, I was one of the people who I was supposed to be a physician expert witness on the stand. Mm-hmm. And man, I was so confounded by the whole thing. In 1 minute, I was a cardiothoracic surgeon. And then a few minutes later, they asked me something else. And all of a sudden I was a nephrologist as well. And it was just so confounding to me. And so, that led to obviously a lot of laughs at the time, but I think it speaks to some of the greater anxieties behind, being outside of the OR and now you're in a courtroom and it's just a different world. So I'd love to hear more about your experiences with that and how you maybe overcame some of those anxieties and fears.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I think it's fascinating that you got that experience in school, because overwhelmingly, it is a huge area that we do not talk about in medicine, and we don't talk about in school. The fact that I didn't have a single course. We didn't talk about it at all. It was like maybe, 1 hour of one class said, okay, these are the legal implications of what you're about to do. And nobody really, I don't think anybody really grasped what it is going into it. So that's cool that you got to do that. I think that's pretty cool. So, real quickly, I think you have to know my background story and kind of what happened to me to delve into how I became a CRNA expert witness. And it's a really long story. So Jennifer and I have tried really hard to get it kind of, briefed down, because we don't have a lot of time. But essentially, I did a case that, and I start by saying this every time because I did a case that in my gut wasn't sure I should be doing. And I come back to that a lot because the more we practice anesthesia, I think the less we listen to kind of our inner gut that says, maybe something's not quite right. Maybe I need to think, that type of thing. And I think as we practice more, we are able to push that away, and we're able to kind of not let that be as much of a voice inside of us telling us to do something or not to do something. So I was actually filling in for somebody else who had a death in the family, an anesthesiologist. I had only worked with this particular surgeon maybe 3 times. And they called me on Monday and said, this patient wants to have a plastics procedure, and she is getting married in 6 months, and this is the only time that she has to have this done. She's already taken off work. She's a nurse. Okay, so I say it every time like that. That should have been a timeout right there, because the myth kind of holds true about that. So I get to the procedure center. Again, not a place I've been often, and the lady was very healthy, very, very nice. We did all of the pre-op and everything went great. At some point, it was realized that there was no end-tidal CO2. So I thought, and this is kind of a pivotal moment that I bring up because I made a decision as a practitioner and as a professional that I thought we could do this case without an end-tidal CO2 that was working properly and continuously for the whole case. It was office-based anesthesia. I planned on using a nasal cannula, and I had a lot of other means by which to tell if the patient was breathing, her oxygen saturation. I had a precordial stethoscope. I had a lot of backup plans. I had end-tidal CO2, but I didn't have any numbers or anything like that. It was just kind of like, and we all know, and this is what comes out of this, a big thing that came out of this, that end-tidal CO2 with nasal cannula is not really accurate anyway. Whatever the number says could be skewed by, 20 to 80. I mean, who knows? It's not really real. So we do the case. Everything goes fine. The case goes longer than I anticipated, so that was kind of a bit of a problem in the long run. But she has railroad track vital signs. Everything is perfect. And this was, a conscious sedation, moderate sedation, sometimes deep, but for the most part, we did about 5 or 6 position changes, and she was awake enough to turn herself back and forth. So that's I like to kind of put that in there to kind of give the level of sedation that we were at. By the end of the case, I had not given any anesthesia medication. She basically got Versed, fentanyl, propofol. She hadn't received any medication for probably 30 to 40 minutes anesthesia-wise. I said, we're at the end of the case. Can I go ahead and sign off on anesthesia, give a report to you for PACU? I really have to go to the bathroom. And they're like, sure. So I give a report to the surgeon in the room and to the nurse in the room. And at this particular center, PACU and the operating room are the same room. They just recover the patient in the same room that they've done the procedure. And I go to the bathroom. When I came back from the bathroom, I could hear the heart rate monitor, and it was like, beep, beep, beep. And I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? Has a lead come up? Of course, you go through all these things that you hope it is. And it wasn't. Her heart rate was 28. We did a full ACLS protocol. I was not able to intubate her, but I was able to secure her airway with an LMA. She had a lot of airway swelling from being prone and supine and prone and supine, and a lot of fluids. That's where the case going longer than anticipated kind of came into it. And I knew when I came home that night, we did ACLS, we got her back. She went to the hospital, and I pretty much didn't have any follow-up after that. I didn't know what happened to her, but I knew something in my gut. I knew that it wasn't going to be good. So I got home and I said to my husband, I think this is going to be a bad situation. So I was served with papers, delivered to my house. I was named in a lawsuit. MedPro was my malpractice attorney. They assigned me a wonderful, incredible attorney. We did a year of depositions and discoveries and all the things that go along with it, producing charts. My personal deposition was about 8 hours long. I had a real bulldog of a plaintiff's attorney who just let me know during my deposition that the nurse that I gave report to when I turned the patient over to PACU was in fact not a nurse. News to me, I didn't know that. apparently she went to nursing school, but she never actually finished. She didn't pass the nursing board. She never took them. But she was presented to me as a nurse, as the nurse in the room. So to make a long story short, I made the decision after about a year to go ahead and settle my case. It takes a huge toll on you mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. It's a very, very difficult and devastating thing to go through. So my husband and I and my attorney, we sat down and we decided to settle. So we did, and okay, end of story. I've settled. My insurance company is paid out. That's it. The Georgia Board of Nursing decided, because this was a very, very high profile case, and so she ended up having a lot of lawsuits against her. And there were two anesthesia providers that kind of got swept up in the whole, let's kind of make example. The Georgia Board of Nursing really felt like they needed to do something. So they sent me a consent order. And the consent order basically contained a lot of stuff. The biggest thing on it was patient abandonment, because I had given reports. I'd gone to the bathroom and given a report to a nurse who wasn't a nurse. And I didn't know that, but it basically, they charged me with that and a multitude of other things. And essentially, we worked for about a year and a half to get that consent order whittled down to failure to record temperature on not failure to monitor, but failure to record a temperature on the anesthesia record, and not failure to monitor end-tidal CO2, but failure to write a quantitative number for end-tidal CO2. For nasal.
That was something I had to change in my practice, even though the nasal cannula was something that was completely unreliable with regards to numbers. I was, instructed when I first got into my 1099 stuff, no, you can't just put a plus sign. You have to put an actual number. And it's amazing how much of your story is just the bells are alarming in my own head, because I worked in a hospital setting for 5 years, and then I went 1099, and I worked in a couple of places, and one of them was plastic surgery. I worked in some GI centers, but when you talk about that handoff, I vividly remember having a patient that, at one of these clinics, that we had been in a case much longer than I anticipated. They'd received more medication than I anticipated them needing. And then I was expected to drop them off in a recovery room with somebody. And I could tell right away that this somebody was not a nurse and was not, they didn't know how to how to take a blood pressure. They didn't know, the O2 sats dropping for a moment, because they didn't turn the O2 on.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, no, we need to, can we get the O2 on, please? And, then it's just, it's all of these things that, you come to find out, well, this person isn't trained in any of these things, wouldn't know how to help an airway, but they were expecting me to go right into the next case. And I said, no, I got to stay here and make sure that this patient's okay. But that just makes me think that these kinds of scenarios are just so much more common than, us just having the luck of talking right now and figuring this out, that I've had this situation. Well, you had it too. Wow, what a coincidence.
And one thing that Jennifer, one thing that Jennifer has gotten feedback on a lot of the evaluations is that we're taught in school to write a plus sign for end-tidal CO2 for nasal cannula. I mean, I hundreds of us, thousands of us do it. And basically the consent order that I signed for the state of Georgia basically says, you shouldn't do that. We don't want you to do that. It's not right. So now after I talk about this, the kind of the takeaway, besides the CRNA expert witnesses, I do a plus sign, and then I do a slash, and then I write whatever the number it says on the monitor, and then I write a little thing at the bottom, because I still paper chart, that says end-tidal CO2 via nasal cannula not accurate, just to kind of cover myself, because I'm going to write down 20 if that's what it says. And if you get into court and somebody says, well, 20 is not really or 15 is not really an entitled CO2 that's compatible with life. Well, yes, I know that. That's why I put a note at the bottom that says it's not accurate, because I have a consent order against me in the state of Georgia that basically the entire consent order is because I didn't put a number down for entitled CO2.
Mm-hmm. And that, of course, makes me think of all the comics and memes out there that are, like the basically the, Jesus is watching you while you put down that respiration of 16.
Right.
Kind of thing. I mean, it's kind of the same thing with the entitled CO2. How many people are, in some of these settings where you're maybe still using paper charting and you're putting down just railroad track vital signs. And it's like, meanwhile, it's more of a wave pattern, but yeah.
And Jennifer and I were talking about, when we're doing pain procedures, some of these cases are 3 or 4 minutes long. You barely get the patient sedated and you're trying to chart. And some of these charts I've seen in cases where I get it and I understand. Yeah. You barely had time to put a blood pressure down, let alone get the patient flipped over, sedated, flipped back over to PACU. Mm-hmm. And they're absolutely tearing those charts apart. I mean, they are just at their how do we even know you were even in the room taking care of this patient? This is kind of the questions that the plaintiff attorneys ask. It's absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, so that's basically what happened. And there's actually more after it, which is kind of crazy. And we'll talk about this in the module, because there's this thing called compact states, which are awesome. Let nurses and CRNAs move from, advanced practice nurses move from state to state. What I found out after I signed my consent order in Georgia is that I had an expired nursing license in the state of Alabama that had not been active since 2001. And I had an expired Florida license that had not been active since anesthesia school. And both of those states pursued me for consent orders in those states for inactive license, because that's part of the compact state laws. So that's a real fun topic. Yeah, I know. It's like disbelief.
Yeah. That is mind blown.
Yeah, so that's
come on.
Yeah. So that's a fun topic we're going to talk about in the module, because it's compact states, I think, have been presented in this way that there's a super great thing, and they are, and there's a lot of really good things about compact states. So we'll kind of go about over the history of how compact states came into being and all the ramifications of them. And one of the ramifications being, if you sign a consent order in a state and you have not voluntarily relinquished your license in another state, even if it is not an active license, that state, under the compact state laws, is allowed to take out a consent order against you. And you cannot fight those consent orders. Once you sign a consent order in one state, that is basically a legal, for lack of a better word, it's a legal guilty statement. Yeah. So there's no fighting those in other states. You can whittle those down to say, something less, and they usually run concomitantly with your current consent order, but it's much more common than people think. I mean, I had no idea when the state of Alabama called and said, "This is so-and-so, and I just wanted to let you know I'm the investigator who's working on the case against you for your Alabama nursing license." And I was like, "I don't have an Alabama nursing license." Yeah. He said, "Well, you did. It expired in 2001, but under the compact state law regulations, we're allowed to take a consent order out against you."
Did you ever practice in either one of those states?
As a CRNA, no.
Okay.
I practiced in the state of Alabama as an RN. So I went to Stanford University in Birmingham. Okay. And worked there for about a year and a half before I moved back to Georgia. And then I went to Florida for anesthesia school, so I had to have a nursing license for anesthesia school. So, I mean, I technically practiced as an SRNA.
Gotcha.
In the state of Florida.
Dana, I think you said once when we talked about this, but what was the dollar amount you had to pay just to renew your licenses just so they could discipline you?
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing.
Here we go.
In order for them to discipline you and actually take a consent order out against you, you have to renew your license in that state. Mm-hmm. And so some of them, and it ended up, I can't remember, I'll have to look back, Jennifer, because this is something we'll talk about in the module. I think the state of Alabama wanted me to pay like $500 to reinstate my license. And then they wanted me to pay like a $1,200 fine, and then they charge you for all they make you pay for the investigation against yourself. And so it ends up being, the state of Alabama actually dropped my consent order. To this day, we really don't know why, but they got about a year into it and then stopped pursuing it. And knock on wood, I haven't heard from Florida yet. COVID kind of took over down there, so I don't believe if that's still kind of in limbo. So all that to say, this case happened in 2016. It's 2021, and I am still dealing with the ramifications of this. So the happy ending to all of this happening and all this going on is that my attorney asked me if I would consider being an expert witness for his firm and for other firms in the area. They do a lot of med malpractice cases and a lot of cases that involve anesthesia. Because generally across the board, if a surgeon is sued, everybody in the room is sued. I mean, it's just kind of, they do a blanket statement. So, you know, at some point, I think Jennifer and I, we did a continuing education on Sunday. And I think the statistic was by the age of 65, they did a survey of anesthesiologists. By the age of 65, every single anesthesiologist that responded had been named in a lawsuit, or is it 55? And then by the age of 70, every responded, 91% of the respondents have been named in a lawsuit. So it's a pretty, it happens, I think, a lot more. I mean, that's a pretty high statistic. If you think statistically speaking, if you're 40, I'm above the curve in that I've been named in a lawsuit before the age of 40, but I mean,
yeah, but I think when you look at it, you think about the hundreds or thousands of cases that you do, and over the course of, 20, 30, for some folks, 40 years, it's really, I mean, statistically speaking, it's actually not that, you wouldn't think it would, you would think that it would be a very expected thing to be named in a lawsuit or two, given the, generally litigious environment of medicine and just the way that the laws in our country are.
Yeah. And even though I think something too that kind of gets brought over is like, it's just like a statistic until it's happened to you. And that's what, Dana brought out about just the whole emotional, obviously financial, but just emotional and spiritual effect it had on her. So it's very, I hate to say debilitating, but, she said like she questioned herself as a provider. And I don't know if you, want to talk about that at all, Dana.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, the way I say it is it kind of becomes all consuming. And it's not all consuming in that it's all that you think about all day long, 24 hours a day, but it becomes all consuming in that you work and you think, am I making the right decision? Like, am I giving the best care? Because I still believe that I gave the best care, and that in my particular case, I think the lady had a pulmonary embolism or a fat embolism or something related to the procedure. I don't think it was anesthesia related at all. But she lived, so there's no autopsy or any way to really know what happened. So, but it was all consuming in that when you got home from work at the end of the day, is there going to be a deposition? In my case, because they send you all the depositions and you have to read what everybody's saying about you. Another CRNA testified against me, which, that's the nature of the beast, unfortunately, that's, they have to have an expert witness. So, and it has to be somebody, basically another CRNA. So it was just like, what's going to happen next? And then when the consent order happened, it was like, okay, where is this going to go? And then when the next consent order, it was like, it was just all consuming in that you're just waiting for the shoe to drop and for the next thing to happen. And it really messes with your mind. It like a lot.
When Jennifer was awakened to the idea of physician suicide, she was determined to find a way to prevent similar levels of burnout among women CRNAs. The same applies to her desire to just make a difference in the lives of others, all leading to her creation of Painless CE. Dana, on the other hand, went through the ringer with her own lawsuits and protecting her license. Meeting each other was actually a fortuitous event. With Dana's intimate experience with the legal system and state certifying agencies, and Jennifer's CE experience, the two of them were able to team up to create a really special educational course. Make sure you listen in next week as we learn more from Jennifer and Dana about what it takes to actually become a CRNA expert witness and what went into the crafting of their course. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On-Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. Feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On-Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.